Hi, I'm Emmett Chapman, and you're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi everyone, John Liebman here. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. Coming to you today on location in Southern California at the world headquarters of Stick Enterprises with our very, very special guest today, the founder and creator of the Chapman Stick, Emmett Chapman. Hello, Emmett.
Hello to you.
Thank you so much for inviting us into your facility. Actually, this is your home. You live here, which is very cool. I'm in Emmett Chapman's house. How cool is that?
Well, I'm here all the time.
So it's no big deal to you, right?
I live here. I'm like the bear in my own cave. And every room is by now devoted to business, unfortunately. And my wife Yuta and I, we don't necessarily relish that, but that's the way it turned out, and it's been like that for 45 years.
Wow. Well, good for you. If you find something that works, stick with it.
Yes, stuck with it.
We did an interview. It was actually toward the early days of ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I was looking at it the other day, or this morning, actually. It was from 2010, believe it or not. It was an online interview, and I think we just barely scratched the surface of what the stick is all about, and we got just a little bit about your story. But I want to ask you, you said you were a guitar player in the 60s, and you were into Jimi Hendrix, and you discovered two-handed tapping, and the stick was born. I know it wasn't quite that fast or quite that simple, but fill in some of the gaps for us. How did the stick come to be?
I was a jazz guitarist, and I built my own guitar while I was in the Air Force at their wood shop in Omaha, Nebraska, SAC headquarters. I built a guitar with a longer neck and 9 strings on it, and it had a spoon-shaped body with cutaways on it, oval-shaped body, and so I was playing.
Give me pictures of that?
I do have. I do. I'd have to dig them up, but I have them. Yes, and so I was playing with lighter and lighter picks. I was playing very fastidious. I'd hold my pinky on the pick guard, and I'd use cellophane picks of the tiniest, tinier and tinier. And one day, the pick disappeared. It was in August of 1969, and I placed my right hand over the board of the instrument from the opposite side of my fingering hand, and I drummed my fingers on it. And then I squeezed a few familiar chords with my left hand, and there it was, two-handed playing. It was like lightning struck. It was like a revolution, and I went leaping around the house. Both my daughters can testify to that, and it was like from that point I totally changed character as a musician. My music didn't resemble anything I had done before, which was kind of sophisticated jazz. You could say that you become proficient on a guitar sometime. You get these elaborate phrases going, and they really sound complicated, but you don't realize how many cliches you're playing. It's the strangest thing. So with this two-handed approach, I called it right away open architecture, because that's how it felt, rudimentary, and it was just simple and therefore versatile. You could move your hands anywhere, play in any key, and do rudiments with each hand. And so I just committed myself to it, and I started playing wild music, just wild, just raining down notes. I was listening to Coltrane a lot too, and
were you transferring Coltrane's music to the guitar or the stick or whatever you were playing at the time?
In my own way. Like I had a song called Bells, Echoes, Avalanches that I would improvise off. It was my own composition. But it was very much like my favorite things from John Coltrane.
Yeah. You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. You said you discovered two-handed tapping in August of 1969. I was going to ask you about that because that is pretty precise dating, so I'm glad you clarified that for us. But This is years before Eddie Van Halen came to prominence, and Stanley Jordan and the other two-handed tapping guys. I mean, those are two very different styles of music. But what I'm getting at is, I had heard one time that was actually an old classical guitar technique. Have you ever heard that?
There were 3 guitar tapping musicians before me, and they all held their guitars horizontally, and they taught that way. And they played with their left hand perpendicular to the strings like a guitarist would do, and the right hand was parallel to the strings. And so they would tap. Sometimes their fingers, the line of attack of the fingers would be backwards, sometimes they'd be forwards, sometimes they'd just be playing the tuning of the strings, and they would poke and slide around and do various things. And what I discovered that was original was that both hands were like equal in that they had a line of attack across the frets, across a string, do, re, mi, like that, and semitones too, that was scalar, both hands doing the same thing, both hands approaching the board from opposite sides, perpendicular to the strings, and that was my creation, and so I built the instrument around it.
Okay, so you're a jazz guitarist. You have this epiphany. Now all of a sudden you're an inventor. How did that happen? That's a whole different way of thinking, and patents and manufacturing and sales and all that. How did that transition come to be?
So I tried applying for patent on my own without a patent agent or a patent lawyer, and was rejected and rejected and rejected. They didn't like the ink I used. They didn't like the format I used. I finally gave up and got a patent agent.
This is like 1970, early 70s?
It was mid-70s.
Mid-70s.
Right. And so I was granted a patent first on the tuning, the fourths and fifths tuning, around 1975. And then the following year, the means of supporting an instrument with a on your belt with a belt clip and a shoulder strap to hold the instrument at a certain angle. And then I got more patents after that on details of the hardware, like the bridge and the pickup housing, and then I got trademarks, which turned out to be more valuable, I think. Trademarks can last forever. You renew them every 10 years. And so I went for what's called trade dress, and that's the shape and design, like the beam, neck beam of the stick has rear beveled edges on it. So no one had done that before. I was able to get a trademark on it, and the reason I had done that was to make the instrument look distinctive, so it wouldn't just look like a 2x4 with strings on it. And so it had curves on it. The headstock had a certain look to it. I got a trade dress trademark on that. The pickups were like a rhomboid shape that chopped off at the corners. Got a trademark on that. And then even the fret markers. So I ended up with about 20 trademarks.
Well, did you embrace the business part of it? Because that's such a whole different way of thinking than the artistry and the musical part of it.
Yeah, I just tried to do the whole thing. I divided myself from the very beginning, musician and marketing, manufacturing. I said, born under the sign of Libra, they never can make a choice, so you choose both.
There you go. Yeah, we were talking earlier about Ned Steinberger, and I had the privilege of interviewing him a while back. And the thing that I found fascinating about Ned is that he is not a musician at all. And everything that he put into his instruments was all about design and ergonomics and efficiency and things like that. You've done some things together, right? Some collaborations or some instruments. There's an NS in at least one of your stick models, right?
That's right. That stands for him. That's his name. And that's his design, NS Design. And he and I, it was 1999, we started designing the NS Stick. And what happened, he saw me at a Tokyo trade show about 3 years earlier than that. And he saw me playing away in the booth, we tracked crowds of people. They'd come up and they'd block the whole aisle sometime. me and other stick players that would be playing it at our booth. And he came up and said we should do something together. And I said that'd be a good idea. And then nothing happened until I called him about 3 years later. And I said, I'd like to create a bass guitar version of a tapping instrument that is really for both all techniques, picking, plucking, strumming, and two-handed tapping, and have it be seamless going from one to the other. And there are players that do this really well. Without volume changes, because normally tapping is lighter, less volume. So if you set the instrument up right, get the action low, and you pluck easily and maybe a little bit more toward the bridge, you get this seamless approach where each hand is its own orchestra and can pick, pluck, tap, do whatever you want on it. And Don Schiff is the best example I can think of someone who does this. He's a true artist at it, and amazing. And so we began to design an instrument together. I called him after the 3 years, and I said, I have a project. And he was excited about it and said so. And so we designed something that looked like the negative of a Steinberger guitar or Steinberger bass guitar. And instead of the tail end having the two protruding parts of the body, we had the tailpiece in the middle protruding out like a long through neck structure. But in many ways the body was evocative of his Steinberger guitar. And then he came up with some brilliant inventions of side saddle nuts and bridge, where the strings come around the side, use a hex wrench to adjust the height of them. And I wanted to use that on all my stick models, but since I had so many different tunings and I wanted to preserve the versatility, I couldn't do it. For kind of technical reasons, I couldn't do that. But for the NS stick, it works perfectly, and so we designed this instrument, and we've been producing them, made about 500 of them.
Now, the stick is not a bass. It's not a guitar. But you mentioned Don Schiff. I've interviewed him. I've interviewed Tony Levin, Alfonso Johnson, Kevin Keith, and maybe a couple others. They tend to be bass players that are attracted to it, or at least in my estimation. And I know there's some guitar players, but am I right about that? Why does it seem to be more alluring to bass players, or is that even the case?
It's interesting, a trick of fate. You put your goods out into the world, and what comes back is always somewhat of a distortion of what you originally intended. I was a guitar player. I thought the melody was the greatest reward. I wanted to accompany myself and be a total orchestra, but to get to the melody. That's the beauty part. But along came Tony Levin and Alfonso Johnson, and then later Nick Beggs in England,
right.
And others who were bass players, and they moved it over into another area, and I suddenly got orders from bass players, and which I didn't mind getting.
Yeah.
And Tony was a great supporter, a great friend, and Alfonso Johnson, he had his group going, featuring the stick, the Alfonso Johnson Project. And it's funny about Alfonso. I went to the Bottom Line the night it opened, New York City.
Yeah, I've been there.
And I saw Weather Report.
Wow.
And I saw Alfonso Johnson.
Early Weather Report with Alfonso.
Yeah. And he was elegant. He happened to be in the front of the stage. So here he is playing the bass like a front man. And I thought, man, he should have a stick. And so months later, I was playing at a place in Westwood, at a restaurant, Indonesian restaurant, to people eating, and eating food with peanut butter in it, a lot of peanut butter. And
works for me.
Peanut butter oil, peanut butter of every kind. The place was called something like The Loft. I can't even remember the name, but he was sitting there with his girlfriend, Diana Marta Fino, a Jamaican girl from London. And he called me up later and said he was interested in the stick. So He was one of the first, and he started playing it and using it in albums. But I also noticed he wanted to quit Weather Report. I said, why would you want to quit Weather Report? They're the top group. They're making fusion commercial. Why would you want to leave something that's such a success? But he did, and then Jaco took over. The reason he told me was he wants to go back and study music. He wants to be a musicologist. I thought, my gosh, this is your opportunity. You're right here. You're a young guy, and you're riding the wave. Why would you do it? Well, he's still doing it. He just got, I guess, his doctorate degree. And this is the direction in life he wanted to take. It's the most amazing thing. It's hard for me to fathom. That's the story.
Okay. Do you remember where you were, what you were doing on October 10th, 1974?
Oh, man.
Yes, if you don't, I can tell you.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I was probably in New York City, and
You were on a TV show.
okay. I was at What's My Line in New York City.
With Gene Shalit and Arlene Francis?
Yes, that's right. And
That's on YouTube, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.
I did know that, and I have watched it. It brings a smile.
I watched it this morning.
Oh, boy.
Panel Emmett
Yeah.
Chapman invented
Well, the same guy.
Emmett Chapman
Still
has
me.
invented
Trying to
something
explain
called
to
the
those
Chapman
people
Stick.
what the stick is and how it works. Well, let's talk to the musicians here, because after interviewing all those people that I mentioned, I'm finally starting to get my head around the fact that I know you have, what are there, 8-string, 10-string, and 12-string models. The bottom half are bass strings, which are tuned in fifths, and the top half are guitar strings, which are tuned in fourths. Guitar string, the high half and the low half.
Yes.
What was the thinking about that design? How did you conceive of that, and why?
Oh, it's a circuitous route that I took. Playing guitar, it happened before tapping. I was playing guitar. I had 9 strings, and I was trying to play jazz chords and melody at the same time and make my melody be free, like John Coltrane, but play chords against it, like George Van Eps. And it was kind of impossible, just too much demands on your left-hand fingering. So what I did is the 3 lowest bass strings. Say you have a low E on guitar, and then the next lowest string is A, and the next is D, E, A, D.
I'm with you so far.
Okay, I tuned the E up an octave. That low E I tuned up an octave. I left the A alone, and the D, the 3rd lowest string, I tuned down an octave. So I had fifths backwards.
Okay.
But the lettered notes were the same. Now I could still play all my chords with my left hand on guitar. But my lowest notes were in the interior then, and I'd separated into two groups, fourths and fifths, simply by reversing the lettered notes of the if you think of the lowest guitar string as the 6th string, in my case it would have been the 9th string. So the lowest note and the 3rd lowest from the lowest notes, I reversed the octaves of them, and I had fifths, and so that opened up. I could play a bass note in the middle and play a chord on the melody side and a chord on the bass side all at once. So that's how that happened on guitar. Then when I discovered the tapping technique of my hands coming from opposite sides, I just kept that tuning, and it seemed to work really good because I had open chords. So then I added a lower bass string and a higher bass string, and I went from a group of 3 reverse fifths, inverse fifths bass string group to 5, and that's how I got there.
Okay, so is the lowest string still the same on the 8-string, 10-string, and 12-string, or does that change?
The 8-string, it's a low B, like on a 5-string bass, okay. And on the stick, it's a low C. And then you got to think that any gauge string will fit at any string position because of the hardware on the stick. V slots and double slots and things. So you could have the bass strings flipped, reversed. You could have left-handed tunings, anything you want.
You've really thought about this a lot, haven't you?
Right.
In the last 40 years.
Yeah.
By the way, on What's My Line, you mentioned that there were 10 sticks that had been produced, and they were selling at the time for $550. Has anything changed in the last 40 years?
No, now they're like 2,500.
Okay.
And the railboard is 2,200, and it's my best and latest model.
Kevin Keith was very excited about the railboard when I interviewed him recently. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's an all aluminum beam with the rails as frets like pyramids, integral to the fingerboard surface, which is integral to the neck. It's all one piece, cut from one piece of aluminum. And then it's hard anodized, like set in stone. I have to do no fret work at all. It's all done by machine. The pyramids are leveled flat with little plateaus from fret 1 to fret 25. And then there's a scoop for the bass strings, a bass relief that allows the bass strings to be set lower at the bridge, so that the strings don't buzz against next higher frets.
Incredible. How do you top that, or how do you what do you do after that? What's next? What else can we expect to see from Stick Enterprises?
Well, the very next step is to have a 12-string version, a grand rail board, and so I have it. It's sitting over there in the corner. And I have a production going now of 20 of them, the first production, and waiting list of about 30 people waiting for it, because there are stick players out there that insist on having 12 strings, even though I prefer 10 strings, and some players do and others don't. So it's a real toss-up as far as advantages and disadvantages. 10 or 12 strings.
Anybody ever want more than 12? I mean, you go to a NAMM show and you see these ridiculous, 24-string basses or 30-some string basses. What about for the stick? A 14, a 16?
So I made a 14 once. Yeah,
once? Huh?
Yeah, just
was
once
enough
for somebody in 1979. I made one like that. Yeah, it was the only order I ever got for one. Most people think there are enough strings on it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if I asked you this last time or not, Emmett, but what would you be if you weren't a guitar player, a stick maker, something outside of music? What do you think you'd be if none of that came to be?
I always felt like when I was a teenager that I was multi-talented, and not extraordinarily talented, but just gifted, maybe inherited from my mother, who's half Italian from Chicago. She was an artist. She was a performer. She was an astrologer. She loved music and played the guitar, and she was a writer. And so I grew up in high school making posters, doing lettering, doing art, doing portraiture, caricature. I like music. I like sports even better. And so I just liked to do things all the time and be active. And I was a psychological mess, like a lot of teenagers are, trying to get acquainted with yourself as you grow up into puberty and everything. And couldn't solve my problems very well, but could solve other people's problems. But my way out was always action, play ball, run track, play music, carry a ukulele around in the car with me, play accordion. And do things, build stilts, build yo-yos, skateboards, things like that. And
no wonder you and Ned got along so well.
Ned he may not be a musician, but his art is logic in design, and he really goes for it and thinks outside the box and takes great pride in doing that. Yeah.
Well, Emmett Chapman, thank you so much for inviting us into your home, into your facility. This is truly very, very special, and congratulations on all the success that you've gotten with the stick. It is well-deserved, and we can't wait to see the next thing and the next thing after that. So keep doing what you're doing. Congratulations, and thank you very much again for everything on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
At the world headquarters of Stick Enterprises in Southern California, in the home of Emmett Chapman. I just had to say that again, so that's just too cool. I'm John Liebman. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.